journalist and Conservative campaigner. Good morning.
Good morning, David.
How are you both?
We're good, we're good.
Right.
It was pretty cold getting up this morning, but...
Well, you should try it at 2 o'clock, let me tell you, young Jonathan. Just, if you had a time machine, a time capsule, I was just saying, where would you go? Would you go forward to the future? Would you go back in time? Who would you want to meet?
Oh my gosh, I think I'll need a time capsule that can probably take me into both. But I think I would probably go into the past first.
Right, okay.
I would
Where?
love to be within the suffragette movement.
Right.
Understanding what that was like, the experiences, and probably taking a bit of top tips as to how to navigate.
The emancipation of women?
Yes, I'm all for that. Yeah, that's definitely where I would go first.
And in the future?
In the future, very good question. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
So someone said it was just a really good comment saying they would like to see the folly of net zero, to go forward into the future, see what a failed experiment it was. Where would you go?
I think I could probably find something a bit more exciting to look for in the future. I think just even looking 50 years in the future would be fascinating. If we're looking at the rate of change that's happening right now with kind of emerging technologies and the implications on society, I think we're so absent in our ability to understand what 50 years' time might look like. So I think it would be absolutely fascinating.
I agree totally. And even if you look back in the last 5 years, I mean, we were talking about the rollout of technology, the way it's revolutionised stuff.
Yeah, well, it's like portrayed in sci-fi movies as kind of this futuristic stuff, and now it's
I want to see the new cities, like Arthur C. Clarke's novel Islands in the Sky. You know, what's going to happen in terms of space travel, for example. Anyway, on matters closer to Earth, I'm just reminding people this morning about the breaking news that you're waking up to this morning. The Syrian government appears to have fallen after a lightning offensive by rebels. President Bashar al-Assad has fled Damascus on a plane for an unknown destination. This is according to 2 senior Syrian army officers. Biden and his team are monitoring what they call an extraordinary event taking place. I'm not expecting you to know the ins and outs of Syria and what is going on there, because it is incredibly complicated, lots of vested interest. How worried, Jonathan, are you about, as a young person, about global instability? It seems to me that we have... The Middle East is an absolute mess. You've obviously got the issues with Israel. You've got Zelensky and Ukraine. It's just one thing after another.
It is really concerning, and actually I spent the summer, a big part of my summer, travelling around Europe interviewing Coptic refugee priests. And Coptics, if you don't know, they're a Christian minority who from Egypt. There was also a big Coptic community in Syria, and they've historically been and continue to be very heavily persecuted within the region. And there's significant fears that groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, who may re-enter and fill this vacuum of power, or other kind of more extremist groups, may pose significant challenges to what were already an incredibly oppressed minority. And it's not to say that Bashar al-Assad was a good guy. He was awful. He used chemical weapons against his own population. But when you have groups like the Taliban, for example, right now, who are celebrating because they feel sort of ideological links with many of the people who might have been instigating some of this stuff, it's not necessarily a happy scenario that this guy has been deposed either, if a worse group who are more dangerous could potentially fill the vacuum. Obviously there's an interesting scenario around it where maybe groups like Hezbollah have not been able to support the government as much as they could have because of everything that's been happening. And it has come as a significant shock, with people in Syria having previously seen this kind of regime as eternal in some ways, as Bashar al-Assad's father used to talk about it. So
and of course 2 statues of him being toppled of the father as well.
It's quite reminiscent of something.
I think one of the things that strikes me is how interconnected all of this is.
Yeah.
And you've got these key players like, for example, Iran sponsoring Hezbollah, for example, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're all involved in this. And Russia, with strategic military size, the United States, and in many ways what has happened has happened at the speed it has is because they've been distracted by other conflicts. As a young person, how optimistic are you about the future? And I suppose I'm lucky because I've lived through relative peace in my lifetime. The generation before me didn't. They had the Second World War, and now we're going into what I think is actually very dangerous territory.
And I think I agree, and I think as you was talking about the history, I'm thinking about the next generation of young people who are growing up in this sort of environment, who are almost going to grow up unsure what to believe, and sort of like that consensus of what is right and what is wrong. And I think that is incredibly scary, not just for the children and families that are living in these countries, but even as someone that is British, when you're in schools and you've got schools that are talking about war, you're talking about who is leading in this area and who is doing this. I think it's scary for a lot of children, which we're not really talking about. What will be the mental impact in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years?
And that's a brilliant point. There's another story this week about children accessing information online, which is radicalising those children, and we have a real problem. Plus, also, you've got the migrant crisis, you've got people claiming asylum in this country, almost an unrecognisable country. Is that something that concerns you as a British person?
110%, and I don't think it's just because I'm British, it's because I have 2 young children.
Yes, you do.
And it's not necessarily about what their families believe what is wrong and what is right, but I think what is morally right for a young person, them growing up in this country and not feeling like they have to attack, or they have to have this sense of violence or this sense of aggression towards another child or towards another family because of what is going on in their own countries. I think it's incredibly concerning for a lot of young children accessing this information and not really having the role models around them, like teachers, who are not really talking about what is going on, not just in this country, but beyond this country, and it's almost like silent.
Jonathan, do you share that in terms of people accessing information? We've spoken a great deal about Israel and Palestine, and just people accessing information, and Jade's point, I think, is a really valid one, not knowing what is true and the filtering of that information.
I think it's a really interesting idea to think about. If we look at, for example, in the 1970s, or when people had 3 maybe news channels they're growing up on, and there were these sources of information and everyone broadly had some same consensus maybe on what was going on around the world. They were quite state-aligned in the way that they portrayed foreign affairs, and you compare that to now, where there's almost infinite different media sources and attention, and people are not reading from the same page at all. You can say there's both positives and negatives of that. Obviously you have immense access to information incredibly quickly, but at the same time there is this role of disinformation, and there's this kind of societal cohesion breakdown almost, you could say, because people are not understanding each other and people are not coming at things from any way the same angle. So I think there are a lot of challenges that are being raised by it, particularly for young people who are more vulnerable and more susceptible maybe to more radical influences online, that obviously adults are as well. And so we're looking at countries across the world that are trying to find different pathways to deal with it, whether that's banning social media for under 16s, as some countries are starting to do, or other schooling and education. So Finland's very big on this, around misinformation, disinformation, how to identify it, how to be cynical.
Let's just move on and talk about the special relationship. We talked about Donald Trump there. The front pages this morning, if you are waking up, lots of pictures of Trump and Prince William there. There's something really odd going on here, because he was dispatched at the last minute to go to the opening of Notre Dame. There wasn't any British presence apart from him there, as far as I can see. That relationship, how special is it, and what do you think was going on? Why did Prince William get summoned from the reserve bench?
He's probably summoned because he was told to go.
Of course he was.
But I don't necessarily think that is something that we should be worried about. Right, look, Donald Trump was elected. Some people agree, some people are not happy. But at the end of the day, we've got to understand that as Britain, we've got to build these relationships. And what I do hope, and I do hope that it is in our favour.
Do you think a Labour government puts that in jeopardy?
Very good question. I want to hear your thoughts first.
You opted out. I mean, it's a really... I'm just... The optics of this is fascinating. And look, the French did a great job with the opening of Notre Dame. I mean, I'm not normally nice about the French. No, I'm not normally nice about
the French. Optimistic with that,
They did a great job, and it was amazing, and the cathedral looks incredible. And actually, to give him his due, to turn that around in 5 years, they worked day and night, and it is a triumph, and it's beautiful. And last night, the United Kingdom was represented by William, who did a brilliant job. Actually, he's looking more and more like his father, I think, and his grandfather before him. But anyway, it was the omission from the British government. I just thought it was interesting that William was there, not
absolutely.
Someone else.
No, it's definitely an optics thing. I mean, as we know from some of the words that have been omitted from our Foreign Secretary in the past, the administration does not necessarily have an easily cohesive relationship with the Republican administration in America. So William is an opportunity to...
They hate Trump.
Well, again, yeah, they do, but they have to. This is politics. You have to find a way to work out. You have this long-standing relationship. You have shared geopolitical interest. And so this is a way to effectively coordinate with someone who, we know Trump is a fan of the royal family, and so it's a way to kind of bridge and slowly
smart diplomacy.
Exactly, and Keir Starmer's been trying to act on that. It is somewhat still interesting in that, you know, Prince William is very into, for example, climate change activism and pushes pretty stuff on that, and housing, whereas Trump maybe is less pro that sort of stuff.
You mean he's anti it?
Yes, very heavily.
Fine. Okay, let's pause for a moment. We'll continue with Jade and Jonathan after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're in the middle of our Future Politics panel with Jade Edwards, political activist and Conservative campaigner, Jonathan Gibson, political campaigner. We're in the early stages of the Labour government, which I don't think is going terribly well. The front page of the Sunday Times, go to A&E yourself, apparently. If you're having a heart attack or stroke, you're being told now, official advice is to go to hospital yourself. Do not call an ambulance. Meanwhile, of course, Wes Streeting rewriting the NHS plan. He says, and rightly so, that there's been too much emphasis on secondary care, i.e. hospitals, and we need to bring it back to expand GP services. And he talks about this 10-year plan. They're going to publish this plan, and this is on the back of Lord Aradazi, who basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, the NHS is in a terrible mess, and that the challenge is to get more GPs. And this is, I think, one of the biggest frustrations, which is we're paying all this money and yet you can't see a doctor. Meanwhile, the GPs themselves are threatening to go on strike. This is the rather brilliant bit about this. GPs are not funded directly, or are not directly salaried by the NHS. They are independent companies. But the Labour government in the budget has increased employer national insurance contributions, which hammers the GPs. So the GPs are really unhappy. Just how confident are you, and you probably are going to be pretty partisan, the Labour government says it can turn the NHS round. Can it?
I've never believed anything the Labour Party has had to say, and I think just on GPs and adding more pressure to GPs, I think it makes no sense. If I'm in the middle of a heart attack, I don't want to see my GP. I want an ambulance to come and pick me up.
Well, you certainly don't want to drive to hospital.
And take me to hospital. And it just goes to show how the Labour Party had these ambition plans about the NHS and almost created an NHS which is for all, and they've done the total opposite of that.
Do you think, Jonathan, they've inherited... So I think there's a learning curve for them here. I think they thought the whole time that the former government has messed this up. There isn't enough money going in, 176 billion, another 20 billion quid, so 200 billion we're now up to. But they got in, and now suddenly, when you look at what they're offering, they say this 18-week wait, which they want to tackle, they will aim to get 92% of people seen in that 18-week wait. By the way, currently is 60%. It's not been done for 10 years, and the reason for that is because there aren't enough hospital beds. But this goes back to Jade's point, which is about general practice. If you don't solve primary care, you will never solve the bigger problem of the NHS. Do you think there's an element of growing up here and realising, whoa, we're in government?
I think it's such a multifaceted problem. I mean, there's problems which connect to healthcare around the cost of living, the cost of food, which means people are eating more unhealthily, which means more people are getting sick, etc. I think there obviously is a dire situation which they've inherited. I think
meanwhile, the Chancellor is making things worse because inflation's going to go back up because she's investing all this money into complex problems that no one else believes. They're the fictitious 20 billion black hole, for example.
Well, I don't think that's fictitious. I think there's been evidence which suggested that there is significant black hole in public spending, but then at the same time, it is going to be an incremental change. And Keir Starmer's, I think what has been a learning curve for him is the pace at which you can get things done is not very quick in government because you have this kind of incremental process built into the structure of government within the civil service where it takes time to push things through. So I think that maybe things will happen, but it will be a slow process. It's not going to be solved overnight, for sure. And we'll have to see, there will also be other factors on the outside, things like how emerging technologies might increasingly play a role in the NHS, how our worker relationship from people abroad will play a role in the NHS, and that would also have a big impact in determining the future of our health services. We also can't neglect things like social care and other areas which are really important.
That's a brilliant point. How confident are you the NHS will exist in 10 years?
I wouldn't say I'm particularly overly confident. I think there's still a lot of support, but it's with waiting lists, with the way that things are looking with an ageing population, it's going to be very difficult. I don't think it will have to go completely the other way. I think it will look different to how it is now. I'm not sure the entire structure will be dismantled, but I think it will look different.
So one of the other things that's quite interesting is they're pushing young people to train as doctors. But there's a pushback from young people because young people increasingly want portfolio careers. They don't want to be stuck in one particular job. Is there an issue here getting young people to train in medicine when all you see is that you're going to join a system that's falling apart?
I don't necessarily think young people do not want to be doctors. I think the fear of young people is the mental health strain that it has on them, how much it costs for them, how long it takes for them to be a doctor. I have a lot of friends that are in, the medical field who thoroughly enjoy what they're doing and they're very excited to study for about 6-7 years until they get to that end goal. But I think it's how can we support more young people within that process so it doesn't feel like they're doing 17, 18-hour shifts, sometimes 24-hour shifts, and there's no support for them in that interim. And if we can put that in place, then of course we can encourage more, young people to consider a path in medical care. And we can even go as young as primary years, encouraging, young people or children in that sense to understand what it means to be a doctor and why it's important to be a doctor. But we can't encourage all these young people to do it, and they're suffering in the process.
I want to move on and talk about the armed forces now. I mean, this is a story where my mouth dropped open this morning. Ministers are forging ahead with plans to use electric vehicles for combat on the battlefield. Oh my God. Despite warnings from military grandees, they could put the armed forces at risk. Yes, apparently the Ministry of Defence is ramping up the testing of these electric vehicles. Their idea is that essentially we can provide world-class military facilities and fight net zero. Is that really top of our list when we're in a war zone?
Well, I think with our military services and our military infrastructure at the moment, we have significant black holes in that for the amount we're spending, we're not getting the amount back that we should be.
Is the answer to plug your tank in overnight?
I don't know enough about the actual military warfare side of it as to what's sustainable. I would defer to whoever the experts in military weaponry.
But it does sound a bit potty, doesn't it?
Well, if it has a military disadvantage, if it has a significant military disadvantage, certainly. If not, then I don't really see the issue.
Okay, where do you stand on that?
Well, it just sounds a little bit like a joke, isn't it? We need to be protecting our country, and of course, if it does have that end goal of supporting the world or the planet Earth, then fantastic, great. But it doesn't need to be top line news. That's not something that I necessarily need to consider. Are you protecting us or not?
There's a brilliant quote here from Admiral Lord West of Spithead, former First Sea Lord, saying the aim should be getting war-winning equipment that we can use in conditions, not achieving net zero. Colonel Tim Collins said, I doubt our adversaries will be looking at this sort of thing. I don't think a battery-operated vehicle can provide the horsepower that we need. I think I have to take a break now. After the break, I'm going to ask you about this story, which I think you've only just seen. The idea that we're going to the government wants to roll out digital ID so that you don't have to prove your age when you go into a pub in a traditional way, but they are rolling out something rather more macabre. I'll tell you more about that after this break. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning.
It's getting a nice that is just, he destroyed London single-handedly. All the crime, everything in London is disgusting. I can't.
He's destroyed the transport network to maximise the amount of money you can give public to workers.
Yep.
And he's destroying driving with charges that is going to... He doesn't care because you go on of machine, quick.
Across the UK on DAB Plus. On speaker. On.
Welcome back. This is Talk. Let me give you the latest. The Iranian embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus has been stormed by militants. This is according to Iranian state-owned news channel Press TV. The Iranian embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus has been stormed. Assad has fallen. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is doing the rounds this morning. This is the media round. She's commented on the government round this morning, saying she welcomes the fall of Assad's regime. That makes me think, where is Keir Starmer? Where is David Lammy? Neither have tweeted this morning. They haven't made any comment at all. Angela Rayner says she welcomes the fall of Assad's regime, which is all well and good in some ways because he was a brutal dictator, but at the same time it rather underplays the situation and simplifies the situation. We'll bring you more on that as and when we get it. We're in the middle of our Future Politics panel with Jade Edwards, political activist and Conservative campaigner, and Jonathan Gibson, who's a political commentator. I want to move on to this because it's a really interesting story, particularly for young people younger than yourselves who are buying alcohol in a pub. So, obviously, if you have to prove that you're 18. Ministers are preparing to change the law for customers buying alcohol in shops and bars as they embrace a technological revolution. Now, so the way they're selling it is to say, oh, you don't need to bring an ID with you. You can bring a digital ID, which you give to the bar, they scan it, and they know whether you're 18. But there's a warning to this, because in Estonia, they now use this for a state-issued digital ID that's called an EID. You pay bills, you vote online, you sign contracts, you shop, you access your health information. And so my concern about this is this the beginning of something much deeper? Tony Blair tried desperately to get state IDs to the British public, and it was roundly rejected. Where do you stand on this?
You know what? In the next couple of years, especially with the advancements of technology, I think we're definitely going in this direction where everything will be digitalised. I think my greatest concern, and I think something that hasn't been spoken about, is if my digital IDs on my phone, and we can see, especially in inner city London, where many phones are being stolen, we're seeing pickpocketing on its rise. It's quite concerning and scary that all my details, my personal details, will be on my mobile device.
But your COVID stuff is already on it.
But I think with COVID, and I value health, I think it's, ultimately very important. But my passport, my driving licence, my health record, where somebody can essentially become Jade Edwards, and I don't necessarily trust the training, especially those that are in pubs, that are going to necessarily take that very seriously.
The really interesting thing about this is, do you remember in the COVID pandemic, they used the fear to push this? So you had to have a vaccine passport. There was then on your phone. It would then link to your national insurance number. It linked to your medical records. So all of that was pushed through under the auspices of this. Are there any concerns here that because kids are so desperate to drink, they'll go, yeah, I'll have digital ID, but it's the implications of where this goes are quite far-reaching?
Well, there's kind of this interesting trade-off between privacy and security. How private do you want your information to be? How separated do you want it to be from government, from corporate, versus
I've got nothing to hide. That's what people say.
Well, maybe they can use it against you, if they know your information. We're already seeing this at a much larger scale, I would argue, in the corporate world. If you look at your YouTube, if you look at Twitter, if you look at LinkedIn, these websites know a huge amount about you and are personalising recommendations and videos, etc. to you. They also may be collecting more data from you than you realise. If you look at things like Pokemon Go, for example, that collected your home address, your name, your location,
Did it?
A whole range of factors. Seriously, there are these websites and where they're extracting arguably far more data than they need. And we're seeing the increasing digitalisation with services like Alexa or sleep tracking or Google Watches. So I think, to be honest, compared to that, this is
so that's really interesting. I mean, they're
say.
also saying, clearly the direction of travel is to a national ID scheme, and they're saying this will help with immigration and illegal people who are here illegally, and you can kind of see that people saying, well, therefore it's a good idea. I just think it's a one-way street.
I think it's a little bit of a cover-up as well, because to then mention illegal immigration in regards to and
buying
using
a beer,
the sense of it just goes to show that there's probably an undercover plan that is going on. And I think I've been having a lot of conversations, especially at work, around the rise of AI technology, and also how we're educating AI, and how that can actually seek to go against certain types of groups. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, I think in the corporate world especially, is that they're tracking when you log onto your computer where you are during your working hours. And I think that is quite scary, because it's not just about the personal details, but who has access to it, and if it can be held against you as well.
It's so funny you say that. I mentioned mentioned it this morning in makeup because of the organisation I work for. They know which door I go through. For example, you're right, you're tracked through your digital footprint. So maybe I'm pushing back. Maybe I'm just a dinosaur and I'm pushing back.
No, but I think there seems to be this different reaction, and I've actually spent the last 6-7 months working in this area of emerging technologies and data and privacy, etc., between when the corporate world implements it and when the government implements it. And it's interesting to see why we get this slightly different feeling. Like, is it really fair? And what's more concerning maybe is this misinformation gap where people don't understand maybe even what cookies mean. Maybe that when you click remove all cookies, that's not actually all cookies. Maybe with Facebook they can see your friends even not on the platform. There's huge amounts of information that maybe we don't know, but then data has a new power and ability to transform systems.
Just very quickly, and I have to do this quickly. I used to send about 120 Christmas cards. Price of a stamp is now £1.65. People aren't sending Christmas cards anymore. Are you?
I'm not sending Christmas cards. I'm still writing the children Christmas cards at school. But it is, it's extremely pricey to now do that. And I think that's quite a shame. Christmas is a festive period. It's not about digitalising it. It's about those personal messages. So,
I agree.
yeah.
But if you send 100 Christmas cards, which I don't think is out of all proportion, that's £165.
Yeah, it's becoming incredibly expensive, and I don't think, unfortunately, online has the same touch to it. Maybe it's...
Are you sending Christmas cards?
Well, yeah, I'm sending some to those who celebrate. Yeah, for sure.
The question is, do I make the list? That's what I want to know. Thank you so much to both of you. Jade Edwards, political activist and Conservative campaigner, and Jonathan Gibson, political commentator. That